Last time, we explored what I believe to be the best entry point for a curious bystander, the Cosmic Era. The reason for that is because I find that the entries within that segment of the Gundam timeline to be easily recognizable, very accessible, and balanced in terms of content, not being overbearing or leaving much to desire. However, for most, another period of time is often recommended, simply because it is the era that started it all, the Universal Century. The Universal Century started the Gundam franchise and remains to this day the most developed portion of the IP. Unlike the Cosmic Era, the titles of its contents vary quite a bit, and as a result is a lot harder to piece together as a layman. As such, in an attempt to make experiencing the Universal Century palatable, I will offer what I consider the smartest way to enjoy the most important parts of this era and get you tapped into the veins of this segment of the Gundam Codex. If you follow the recommendations given by this Dummies Guide series properly so far, you should be visiting the Universal Century with the experience of the Cosmic Era in your repertoire. It is with that in mind that I want to reiterate that the purpose of this series is not to make you the guru of Gundam, and really should be treated as titled, a Dummies Guide. What I will suggest will probably be poo-pooed by hardcore fans who often do not recognize the difficulty of getting into such a monumental universe like Gundam. With that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the Universal Century. Much like you've seen elsewhere, the Universal Century is squarely in or even past the space exploration age, with various nations and colonies being scattered across the universe. As you humans do, we often find ways to conflict for good or bad reasons, and as such, wars have unraveled. Again, that's really just more of a teaser that will set expectations straight. Akin to the Cosmic Era, the Universal Century spans multiple types of medias, whether it be shows, mangas, movies, and anything in between. And for better or for worse, we will largely be ignoring the non-show bits, as they aren't helpful for our purposes, though some are worth a visit if they speak to you one way or another. Although you can definitely find a link between series from one to the other, because of the way the Gundam shows are laid out, it's actually somewhat hard to find a through line that connects everything together. Combine that with the fact that there is a lot of excess fat in terms of adaptations, side stories, and spin-offs, one can easily get overwhelmed. I will present to you a watch order that is the most succinct possible, all while being able to tell a coherent, continuous story. My watch order will not actually contain every piece of Gundam media set within this era, because I believe that a number of them are actually not worth your time, believe it or not. Starting off, we have the appropriately named Mobile Suit Gundam The Origin, which is composed of 6 roughly hour-long episodes which sets the scene up for everything that follows, establishing important characters that will become household names before long, and most importantly actually gives a different perspective to a complicated world. It may also be useful to think of this series as the tale of Char. What the Origin series is setting up for is actually the original 1980s Mobile Suit Gundam. I wouldn't actually recommend watching the series as it was originally released. Instead, 3 compilation movies have since been released as a trilogy, which will provide you with the experience that any fan would recommend. This series laid the foundations of all future Gundam series, and even a newer fan with only the Cosmic Era as reference will be able to find points of commonality. This series in particular will introduce you to Amuro Ray, the template upon which every other future MC is based off of in one way or another. Additionally, you will meet the most iconic Gundam model in existence, the RX-72. While for the most part the original Mobile Suit Gundam series tells a singular story, the next suggested watch adds additional flavor to this period of strife and conflict. Mobile Suit Gundam, the 8th Mobile Suit Team, Miller's Report, adds details to what is actually happening to the rest of the populace apart from our main cast during the events of the Mobile Suit Gundam story. While it isn't a necessary watch, this 50-ish minute enjoyment goes far into adding weight to this period of time, and I think it is worth it. For what comes next, some may suggest watching the MS Igloo series, which much like Miller's Report serves to add flavor as it tells more side stories during this time period, but I would actually personally suggest glossing over it. Another side story series is Gundam Year 80, War in the Pocket, which much like the last two are not required watching, but I think this one is actually one of the best Gundam stories period, especially considering its small package. The totality of this is only about 6 episodes, and I cannot recommend this enough. Following up on side stories worth your consideration are the 2 Gundam Thunderbolt compilation films, which is more in line for those who want visual excitement and action. I will also add that this series has a lot of style, and while not a fan favorite necessarily, is definitely a recommended watch. Although again closer to side story than main story, the Mobile Suit Gundam Year 83 Stardust Memories compilation movie, The Afterglow of Zeon, preps us for the next big chunk of Gundam continuity. The quality of this series is in line with the original Mobile Suit Gundam and the upcoming series, and whether you want to know as much as possible heading into the next one is your call. The next significant step forward in the Universal Century is with Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam, which takes place a little less than a decade after the events of the original series. I have a lot of love for Zeta, as it feels like the creators took all the good that the original series had and compounded on it, while tackling the flaws that it had in creative manners. What's left is an interesting and strong story that some consider one of the premier shows in the franchise. Another important thing is that characters established and introduced beforehand don't get thrown to the wayside in favor of the new, and that respect for their own history is incredibly commendable. While the original contained 50 episodes, it has since been compiled into 3 movies, which is definitely worth your time. Unfortunately, Zeta's sequel, Gundam ZZ, is a lot more hit or miss. If you enjoyed the mood and the atmosphere that Zeta provided, I will admit that ZZ does not quite deliver. I think it does have some redeeming qualities, especially later on, and while I don't believe that it is a hard skip, I wouldn't fault you for deciding on moving on from this one. Perhaps knowing that ZZ was middling, we do come back to form with Char's Counterattack, whose name definitely gives away a lot of the plot, but does not disappoint. Char's Counterattack serves as a bombastic way to cap an end to the Amuro Char storyline, and is definitely a must-watch. It is useful to think of the Universal Century as having distinctive bookmarks. The first one kicks off the Char era, starting with the Origin series, and ends with Char's Counterattack, while the second bookmark that I'll quietly name the Laplace's Box era is kicked off by Gundam Unicorn. Set around 3 years after the events of Char's Counterattack, Gundam Unicorn answers the question of what happens after. While not the pinnacle of Gundam, the Unicorn series is still a very strong entry and actually has 2 recommendable ways of enjoying. You can watch the more compact 7-episode 2010 OVA series, or the remastered 22-episode 2016 anime series, which contains more added scenes, somewhat better polish, and some new musical performances. As Gundam Unicorn does a lot to introduce this second win for the Universal Century, its story is kind of basic, but the spectacle does make up for it. This will be a recurring theme among the series within the Laplace's Box era, as the stories are usually around above average, but the visuals and musical performances are often hitting the highest notes. After Unicorn, we have the Twilight Axis series, which is best enjoyed through the compiled quote-unquote movie, which itself is only about 25 minutes long, named Red Trace. This expands a little bit more as to how things are going since the events of Gundam Unicorn, and while again not required, is so short that it's probably worth your time. Another movie that follows up on Twilight Axis is Gundam Narrative, which again explores the consequences of Gundam Unicorn. This movie is less than 90 minutes, and while not the best, is still worth a watch. The last series falling under the Laplace's Box era is Gundam Hathaway, which is currently still being released. The first of the 3 parts has been released and is ready for your enjoyment, while the other 2 are being delayed due to unexpected world circumstances. While not too much can be said about the series as a whole, the plot so far shows much promise, and you can join the rest of the Gundam fandom in waiting for its release. The third bookmark into the Universal Century I will name The Late Stage, as the events of the series contained within this part is definitely within reach of the events preceding it, but feel rather detached as none of the established characters make a reappearance, causing it to feel kind of like side stories. The first of the 2 entries is Gundam F91, which shows us that the more things change, the more things stay the same, as we continue to be plagued with intergalactic conflicts. It's not a particularly hard watch, as it is just one movie, but the issue is that it feels kind of average while also not being necessary, as it doesn't have any connecting threads between any other series, including the next one. I wouldn't recommend watching this unless you have around 2 hours to kill. The last notable entry is Mobile Suit Victory Gundam, which is set almost half a century from the events of Gundam Unicorn, so there's not much in terms of through line there. However, I do think that unlike F91, this is actually worth a watch. It has some darker tones and engaging plot lines that keep the show rather entertaining. At the very least, you should watch the series because its intro song is annoyingly catchy. Before we do anything else, let's recap the suggested watch order. We start out with the Origin series, then the original Mobile Suit Gundam compilation movies, followed by Miller's Report, Year 80, War in the Pocket, the Gundam Thunderbolt compilation films, and Year 83, the Stardust Memories compilation movie Afterglow of Zeon. This leads us straight into Zeta Gundam, whose sequel you can largely skip if you aren't in the mood for it, and we'll top off the Char era with Char's Counterattack. Then we move into the Laplace's Box era, where we start off with Gundam Unicorn into Twilight Axis Red Trace, then the narrative movie, followed by eagerly awaiting for the rest of the Hathaway films. Finally, we reach late stage Universal Century, for which you can largely skip F91 but definitely give Victory Gundam a chance. Although it wasn't easy, here is my recommendation on how to best enjoy the flagship timeline, the Universal Century. With that, congratulations, you successfully survived the fattest chunk of Gundam in all of its space opera glory. With both the Cosmic Era and the Universal Century in your grasp, you have successfully graduated from novice and perhaps even become a fan. With that said, next time we'll explore the second heaviest chunk of Gundam fandom, Gundam building. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more, don't have much else to say.